Welcome to I/O Day 2. My name is Treffyn Koreshoff. I'm a UX researcher here at Google. And that means that I get to talk to end users about how they use different cool things online. But before I can talk to people about how they use the great things that you're building, I often have to take them through some sort of a sign-in or account creation moment. And that's what this talk today is really about. It's about making those sign-in and account creation moments a little less painful and a bit more magical. So if you use a username and a password as part of your sign-in or account creation moment in what you're building, then you are in the best possible place you could be at I/O right now. No matter whether you work more on the product development side of things, in which case we've got some great UX to show you, which will help increase conversion for valuable users. Gets a smiley. Whether you're on the development side, where we've got some cool code snippets and libraries that will help make Google Identity integration to what you're building extremely simple. Or whether you, like hopefully we all do, care about the security and privacy of what you're building, we'll take you behind the scenes and show you some of the security that goes into Google Identity and what data is shared. Even if you have no registration flow at all, I'd actually encourage you to stick around, because we think that you'll see some cool things today that you may want to add to your site anyway. So I'm just here for an introduction. And as part of that, I'd like to share with you the top 4 things that annoy me about sign-in and account creation moments. Now, not to give the punchline away, but these are all 4 things that Google Identity can help you with. So to start off, friction. Let's imagine that your user has just got a new phone, new device, and they're signing back into everything. At this point, they're probably thinking, and you may have had this experience, probably thinking, what was that username and password again? Well, they wouldn't be alone. Hawaii's governor has certainly had this issue. Perhaps some sign-ins are more consequential than others, but he can sympathize. So to get around the remembering your username and password, maybe you decide to add this sign-in with Google button or something similar to help your users not have to remember their username and password. Well, this is great, but what happens if we can get rid of this whole sign-in screen altogether? It might look a little something like this. Your user arrives on your site or your app for the first time, new phone, and they're just signed immediately straight back in. I know it can be a bit hard to see down the bottom there, so here it is a bit bigger. People arrive on your site, and they're just automatically signed straight back in. Let's just skip the whole sign-in screen altogether. But of course, this isn't just about sign-in. It's also about account creation. And account creation has huge drop-offs sometimes. And this can be for a variety of reasons. But even for a short sign-up form like this one, we see drop-off of 40% or more. Now, you might be hoping that your users have some sort of password autofill, and that's great if they do. But even if they do, you're still taking them out of the flow, out of what they were doing, to a separate sign-up page. Not ideal. So what happens if we could take this whole sign-up process and move it into one click, and they're into the site? So again, here I'm showing it to you on the first page, the first time somebody opens your app. But the magic of this is that you can take this and place it wherever it makes most sense in your flow. It doesn't have to be at the beginning when they first arrive. It can be wherever they have most intent to create an account. So it is one tap, contextual account creation, where it makes most sense for you. The second thing, well, actually, just briefly, an example from somebody who has integrated this was Redfin, who had an 80% increase in the number of new users once they introduced this one-tap, seamless, contextual account creation. Now, the second thing that annoys me is security. If you look at the passwords that people use online these days, not only are they weak, they're often reused, and they're susceptible to phishing. Now, we're going to deep dive into the security behind this, like I mentioned, so I'm not going to go into it too much here. Suffice to say that Google Identity can help with this, and it's the same, again, not to give away the punchline, but it's the same security that we use for Google accounts on google.com. The third thing that can annoy me about sign-in and account creation is quality. Like, you spend a lot of time and money getting people to your site or app, and maybe they convert, maybe they change into a user, but how many of your accounts look like this? Maybe this is an extreme example, but even if a real person with a real email address comes to your site, they may not be as engaged as you'd like them to be. And we hear time and time again from people who use Google Identity that Google users are not only more engaged on their platform, but they create less spam. So at this point, you might be thinking, OK, great, this sounds great. I've got some, I can see some UX improvements I'd like to maybe see a point for in my site. Comes with great security, and you're telling me it helps keep the quality of the accounts high. I'm building a cool thing. I don't have time for this. To which I would say that we have worked really hard to get everything you've just seen and more available to you in just a few lines of code. Again, we'll take you through that in the second half of this. So just a really quick recap. Sign in and account creation moments can be some of the most valuable for your account, for your sites, but they're often the most frictionful. Why don't we replace that with one-tap account creation and automatic sign-in? Security is in the news a lot lately. Feel free to use Google's. You spend a lot of time and money getting people to your site, so give yourself an advantage and get engaged, active users. And lastly, do away with all of the maintenance for these screens for just one or a few lines of code that you implement once. So these are just a few of the things that Google Identity can help you with. That's all I'm going to talk you through today. But I'd like to invite 3 people up on stage who are going to talk you through how you can get this yourself, some other examples of places that this has worked, and also how it works. I'd like to invite Luke, Naveen, and Stephen up on stage.
Thank you, Treffyn. My name is Naveen Agarwal. I'm the Eng lead at Google's Federated Identity team. And I've been in this space from the beginning when you couldn't use all this magic. And here is Luke, who is a new product manager, and Stephen, who's been in the space for a long time. So Luke, you were telling me that you're not convinced about all this magic.
Yeah, that's right, Naveen. Hi, I'm Luke. I'm new here, and I'm still figuring all this out. So one of the things I'm really curious when I first heard about this whole federated identity thing was what the user experience is like. How does this magic really work?
So I think let's start from the basic. Lots of people say, what's this magic within there? You actually use all these identity providers every day. If you have any ID card in your pocket, that means you use an identity provider, a driver's license, your employee ID, or a passport. And what happens is they carry some information about you, and you go to a place where they want to verify some information. What do? You take out the ID card, which they accept. You show it to them. They verify that it has the right attributes. It's the right ID card. You haven't tampered with it. And then they let you in. And what happens in the online world nowadays, the state is pretty different. You go to a brand new site. They say, hey, we need to create a new ID card for you. And then we are going to verify who you are. And look at what it would look like in a real world. So you go to a bar. They say, wait, you need to create a new ID card before we let you in. What would it look like? You would be carrying a stack of ID cards on a daily basis, probably thousands. And the burden on each and every shop would be that they have to set up a system to create ID cards for everybody who walks in. If they forgot the ID card, it's a huge cost. But that's what everybody does right now on the online when they create their own authentication system. They say, no, you sign up for my site and remember a password. And that's essentially carrying a separate ID card for each of the site. And if you just replaced it with a very basic identity provider, you get a token from Google, and then they just accept it. And it's that simple. And the experience is fairly straightforward. You go to a site. You see one of the identity providers they accept. In this case, if you click on Login with Google, you go to your identity provider. They generate a card for the ID you want and essentially send it back through the magic, which we'll talk more about, and you are in. And it's much more convenient for the user and for everybody. And what happens inside the ID card, many people wonder, we have created what we call an ID token. And it's very similar to your ID card which you carry. It has some information about you and some cryptographic information for them to verify that it is authentic. And essentially, this is the ID card which the identity provider generates. In a sense, it makes it so much easier. You're using the identity which you already have in the digital world. Does that help?
Thanks, Naveen. That gives me a really good overview, but I'm still really curious what it's like for our users going through this. I know when I come to the sign-in screen, there's all these buttons, and I'm not sure which one to click, or what happens if I clicked one last time and I try and click a different one, or if I already have a password on the account. I'll probably, like most people, just end up hitting forgot password and going through the email reset flow, because that way I really know that I'm getting back into the right account. Stephen, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about what our user experience should look like. Is there a better way than this?
Well, you're completely right, Luke, that this user experience confusion is one of the top reasons why sites, apps, and end users are still using username and passwords today. And we've thought a lot about this. I'm really excited to talk about the innovations we're making in this space. We're thinking about new ways to get users signed in and signed up. What I'd like to focus on today is an experience we call a one-tap account creation. Now, this is a new way for end users of Google's identity systems to share their basic information with a site or an app that they're using with a single click. This can be shown in line on the page without the user even having to navigate to a full login screen or find the Google Sign In button. Once the user's tapped, this information is conveyed to the site or the app that they're using, and they're able to log into an existing account or help create a new one. To really illustrate this, what we're going to do is switch over to a demo and show you this in real life. OK, so what I've got here is a version of Chrome running in the mobile emulation mode. So you can see we're emulating an iPhone device. So this works across all platforms, including iOS. And I have a user signed in here. Her name is Elisa. Now, imagine that Elisa is preparing for a trip and wants to visit that site that she heard about called Hipmunk. So Hipmunk has this really cool user interface. And imagine, as she loads up the Hipmunk site, she'd like to identify herself to keep track of the travel that she's planning across devices. Now, that UI that I just mentioned shows up at the bottom here. Elisa is able to say that it's OK for this site to know who she is without having to go and find the login screen, figure out sign in, sign up, or determine which button she needs to press or which one she pressed last time. So let's try it out. With one click, we see that Elisa's account is active here on Hipmunk. And this is a live site. You can actually go and try it out yourself on your phone to see how it works. Let's go back to the slides. Now, how does this perform? Well, Hipmunk has actually come back to us and told us that this has dramatically increased the rate at which users are creating accounts with their service, and in turn, unlocking this opportunity to personalize their experience across devices. But it's not just here on the mobile web. We've had this opportunity to streamline and assist in account creation on Android for some time. So if you've been to our talks in the past, you might have seen some of the stats and numbers like this. By incorporating a one-tap identity experience, creating an account with just a single gesture, apps like Hotel Tonight have been able to improve their book out and conversion rates by things like 20 to 30%. That's pretty phenomenal for just a simple UX change, an improvement to the user's experience. We appreciate, of course, that it's not just about acquiring these new users who might be visiting for the first time. You have a lot of existing users. And it would be really a shame if all of those existing users had to identify themselves again and again across devices. After all, today people are using multiple phones, they're using tablets, and their desktop computer. And so what we offer here is the ability for people who have used a site or an app before, coming back to that same service across platforms, to be signed in without having to find the login screen. So let's take a look at an example of how that works. We'll switch back to the demo device. Now, to simulate a new device, what I'm going to do is actually switch over to an incognito tab. Now, you'll notice that in this incognito tab, we're in the full desktop version. So imagine this is Elisa coming back on her desktop machine, where she'd like to perhaps complete a booking that she was searching for from mobile earlier. As you can see, we have a link to the Hipmunk site. And what I'd like to do here is draw your attention to the top right, that as Imagine Elisa comes back on the desktop site, you'll see that her information is being retrieved by the web property and used to sign her in without having to navigate or even remember to go through a login flow. At this point, you can see that things like her previous search history are immediately available right across devices. So it's really this opportunity to have people come back to your site, not have to repopulate their shopping cart or redo all of their searches. They can continue where they left off with a shopping cart ready. So let's switch back to the slides and see how this one performs. So for Hipmug, it's also been equally impressive. The proportion of users who are using their site in a signed-in state and getting that personalized experience has gone way up. We have other numbers from folks like AliExpress really even saying that their conversion rates go up for these users who are signed in automatically. And to call out one more stat that we've seen from Android over the years, we've had big apps like Netflix using an automatic sign-in experience with data saved in their Google account, whether that's the Google account itself or things like saved passwords, and a result, seeing a dramatic reduction in the support and inquiry volumes. So of course, people who are signed in automatically don't have to call up a help desk to ask for information about their subscription or get back into their account if they get stuck. So if you put all these pieces together, I think we really are opening the door for a much better user experience across the web and apps. There's this one-tap sharing of identity that streamlines the experience to say who you are. There's an automatic sign-in for people who are coming back and want to stay signed in. You don't even have to go to the login screen anymore. And finally, it's the opportunity to unlock this personalized experience that continues across devices. I'll add one more thing here, that is that we still have the traditional button-based flows. That's the baseline that you'll have to implement across all platforms to handle edge cases like when the user's not signed in. But really the hope is that these technologies can optimize and improve the common cases for users who are visiting your site or app so that they never even have to see the login screen at all. And hopefully that will address a lot of those problems and questions that you brought up, Luke.
Thanks, Stephen. That honestly looks like a far better future than what I was seeing on that complicated button-based screen. But at the same time, I think a lot of people still have questions when it comes to using an identity provider about data sharing. When you traditionally go in through an identity provider, you have this consent moment where it's unclear, will your friends get spam? Will they be able to send emails to your contacts? It's kind of scary and confusing. It's when I sign up with an email and a password, I know that the site only knows my email. Isn't that a lot safer?
Yeah, that's an important topic these days, Luke. And so let's go back to that one-tap UI that we saw earlier. The thing I'd like to emphasize here is that it's a very limited set of information that's being shared with the site or the app that the user is interacting with. It's only exactly what's shown: their name, their picture, and their verified email address. Now, this is the same, essentially, as if the user typed in this information manually, but it doesn't have any of the problems of typos or mistakes, and it didn't require the work of the user having to manually verify that they own an email address by opening up their mail app and clicking on a link. The developer knows that their actual account, especially in the case of Gmail addresses, is active on this device and they own it. So what we've done here is really thought about separating out the basic information that's shared to say who you are in a login flow from requests for additional data, as we saw from the social sign-in days that Luke just pointed out. We do appreciate, though, that there are a lot of apps and services out there that do need and depend on this additional data. So for example, you can imagine an experience where after you've booked a flight or some travel plans, you need to synchronize this with your calendar. And it would be great if you could have this on an ongoing basis so you didn't have to manually keep your calendar up to date. In an example like this, a developer can still ask for that type of access, but it comes at a point where the user best understands why and how this data will be used. So it can be asked for contextually, just like you've seen on Android and iOS, where things like access for contacts or photos can be presented at the right time when people understand why they're needed. And when you do go through the experience as an end user, you can see that we're doing a lot here to make it really clear who you're interacting with, what data will be shared, and how you might see the terms and conditions the data will be used under, or even revoke or control access in the future. If you put all these pieces together, I think we're really trying to improve the ecosystem here. For a long time, we've had an app review process, and we're expanding that to verify who these apps are, what data they're using, and making sure that we have contact information and the ability to shut them down if things go wrong. We'll be expanding that to things like our one-tap sign-up to ensure that these powerful APIs and services are only used by the developers who have good intentions. The last big concern and question that comes up in this category about data is users' control. Both as a developer and as an end user, people wonder, if I use these Google identity technologies, am I becoming dependent on Google? Can the data that I provide to these services only be accessed by using Google services, Google identity APIs? The answer here is no. This information is conveyed to the developer. It's, as I described earlier, a shortcut, helping to pass this information over to a developer and bootstrap the experience. But at the end of the day, you're still in control as an end user and a developer. You can offer other mechanisms to log in. As we've discussed, you have the user's email address. You could send them an email with a recovery link or another way to log in. You could even accept other identity providers, perhaps having things like a phone number where you can send a recovery SMS, or even accept an entirely different identity provider to log into those existing accounts. They're still users in the developer's database and under their control. So I hope that if you put all of these pieces together, Luke, you'll have a better understanding of what we're doing to make it streamlined and clear to the user that when they share only identity information, it's just that limited piece of information that's being conveyed. On top of that, when additional data is requested, it's done in a process where things are vetted, it's clearer, and the user has better control. And finally, users can still log in at the end of the day with other mechanisms. There's no need for them to be dependent on Google. I hope that addresses some of your concerns.
Thanks, Stephen. I love how transparent it is. It's this what you see is what you get model that makes it really clear to me what I'm giving over to the third party. But I think something that goes hand in hand with privacy is security. There's this protocol going back and forth between the site and Google, and when I sign up for an account, I can create a really big password that'll really protect me. Naveen, I know your team spends a lot of time thinking about security. Can you explain why this is safer than my password?
Yeah, security is my favorite topic. Actually, this question we get asked quite often. Is this less secure? Is it going to make my account system less secure? In order to understand, just think about every site has a forgot password flow. What happens when user click on a forgot password? You send an email. The user then goes, signs into their email account, and then find the email, click on a link, and they get back into your account. Now, if you do click Sign in with Google button, what happens? You still go back, sign into your Google account. Google generates a cryptographic token, says, yes, this user owns this email address, and then you accept that, and you get back into the account. The difference is they are pretty equal from a security perspective. I would argue there are some flaws in the forgot password case where somebody could have forwarded that email to somebody else, and people can get back into your account. In this sign with Google, you know that they actually own the email address. But this is just the security equivalence, but there is much more to the account security. How many engineers on your site are working on securing the account system? Think about that part. On the Google side, we actually have hundreds of engineers working on just protecting Google accounts. And for every login attempt, we go through a risk-based analysis based on many of the signals, traditional signals, IP addresses, location, but a lot of them which you don't see, trying to understand whether there is a bot who is trying to sign in based on the cursor movements and so on. And based on that, we figure out whether the risk of that attempt, is it low or high? And if it's basically a risky attempt, we would ask the user to verify through secondary channels. And in cases the user got hijacked, they got phished, we try to reach out to the user in different ways. Even if the hacker had a right password to the account and we think the risk is high, we will not let generally the user or the hacker in and keep the bad guys out. In those cases, we are protecting a lot of accounts, and we are spending a lot of time and energy on doing it. But that's just right now. The bigger part is continued investment. We were the first one to launch two-factor auth for a consumer site, and that is still phishable, even though you have a SMS recovery. And we recently launched what we call advanced protection, if you go search for it, which is based on a security key. If your account needs much higher level of protection, that's non-phishable, because you cannot give away a code to the third-party side. We are also working with internet standards and other companies to protect your other accounts on other sites. And in the future, we want to share some data about the account so you can actually use it to make better security decisions during the purchases and so on. And the last is, as the new surfaces become available, like Assistant, we are making it easier for people to sign in using their Google account. So by using that, you are actually making Google Identity, the security of Google Identity is closer to what you will get the security of your account system. So sophisticated security, we are doing a lot to prevent hijacking, and then, again, the new advanced feature. Does that make you feel better, Luke?
That definitely makes me feel a lot safer as a user, that I can rely on all of these security measures Google's working on. But what about for the developers? There's all these spam and robo accounts out there, a lot of fraudulent actors trying to take advantage of services. How do I know that taking sign in with Google doesn't create just another route for spammers to get in?
That's actually a good question. And this is something most of the people don't think about when they create their account system. What happens is, if I am actually a hacker, I can create my mail server and create probably millions of hacking accounts on your site very easily. Google actually does a lot of work to prevent creating mass accounts. And what that happens is, if you just use the Google identity on your site, you are going to get a lot of those benefits. We were talking to one of the large banks just recently, and I asked them to separate out their accounts based on the Gmail addresses and non-Gmail address, and they were surprised. They saw 8 times less fraudulent activity based on the Gmail addresses than the non-Gmail addresses. And it's because all the security we are adding on the Gmail accounts, which is less spammy, and then not letting those accounts get hijacked. And not just keeping them secure, we find that these users you are acquiring through the Google sign-in are generally real users, and they are more engaged. So we talked about the Redfin having an 80% increase in the sign-up. More than that, we saw more than 40% of the users came back 5 times in the next few weeks. And that is much, much better stats than you can find within your own database. So you are not just using Google Identity to keep the bad guys out, but you are also acquiring much, much better users. And most of the users who have an Android phone, they have a Google account. So does that make things better?
Honestly, that sounds really great as sort of a side benefit of using Google Identity. But everything that you guys have talked about, so complex. There's all these security features. There's all that slick UI on different properties. How complicated? It must be really difficult for everyone in the audience to build this into their site. I know you work on this, Stephen. Do you know?
Yeah, so over the years, I've talked to literally hundreds of different developers about integrations like this. And when it comes down to it, there's 2 major pieces to be aware of. There's the front-end work to add UI to your app or your site or whatever else you're building, maybe an action. And then there's some work on the server side to take that information from the app or the site, look up the user, and provide that information to the user to personalize their experience. So let's dive a little bit into this. On the front-end side of things, you end up having to show the user either a traditional Google sign-in button, or as we've discussed today, try to optimize that with some of the one-tap or automatic sign-in UI. The first time, the user will give their consent to share this information. And at that point, Google is able to provide you, the app developer, a token representing this user, the digital passport that we've been talking about. Afterwards, there's the back-end work, and we'll dive into that in a second. So to illustrate how this front-end work works, let's actually switch over to a demo. OK, so I'm back on my machine here. And what I'll do is I'll take that code that we just saw on the previous slide. And this is the API calls that you're going to need to incorporate to add a one-tap UI to your site or app. So let's suppose you already have a Google sign-in button, and you really want to optimize this experience by turning it into the one-click UI. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this little snippet of code and actually show it running on a real site. So there's a few parameters to this API call, asking to show the Google accounts and requesting a token. As a developer, I mentioned that there's a registration process that you have to go through to get access to these APIs. And what I'm doing here is showing the configuration for a real site. This is actually one from B&H Video. They might even be here at I/O today. And we certainly talked to them in the past. They have their traditional Google sign-in button, but they haven't included the one-tap UI. So I'll show them how easy it is to add the one-tap experience to their existing site. Now, B&H Photo Video has this really cool store in New York where they have all kinds of electronic gadgets. They even gave me a tour the last time I was there. And if you can't make it in person, you can definitely check out their app or their site. And wouldn't it be so much better experience if visiting for the very first time or coming back across devices, when you try to see the information in your cart, instead of seeing this little tumbleweed go through the empty cart because it doesn't know who I am, there was an easy way for the user to get signed in, signed up, or perhaps, as you see further down the page, subscribe for a newsletter. This really feels like the perfect opportunity to show that one-tap UI that we've been talking about today. So to demo how easy this is, what we're going to do is load a script onto the page that makes this library available. At this point, I'm just going to paste in the code from the slide and run it here. Now you see that in line on the page, this UI has appeared. As you, the developer, the key thing for you to think about is where and when to show this information to the user. What's the right time to ask somebody to sign up? As you see, it's really easy to add. The key thing to think about is showing it at the right time so that people want to click. Now what I'll do here, again, I have Elisa's account active. I'll click in through, and you'll see that the promise resolves. I get some information back about who she is, and it includes this thing we've been talking about today, the identity token. Now it's a big long string here, and that's because it's base 64 encoded. So what we're going to do is go back to the slides and talk a little bit more about what you do with this information and how B&H could actually take this and sign the user into perhaps their existing account. Before we get there, let's just finish up a few points here on the front-end side of things. So as I discussed, you need to register and create a client ID for your application, so agree to things like the terms of service. And then, not only do you need to show the UI at the right point, you probably want to check if those existing users already have an account. So perhaps before you even show the one-tap UI on page load, you'll probably want to call a corresponding API to sign in existing users. That's the retrieve method here. Now, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, that these similar APIs are available for Android. And since we're a bit short on time today, I'm just going to skip over it here, but go to developers.google.com/identity to see how to do similar things in your native apps on Android. One-tap email selection, including phone numbers, and automatic sign-in. All right, so what do we need to do with this information once we've got it? We have this token representing the user. Well, we need to send it up to the app developer server, validate the information in the token, and then apply some business logic. So things like determining whether this is an existing user or helping a user create a new account. So for that, let's take a closer look at the token. Now I took the token here and decoded it so you can see the contents. It's a JSON web token, so a JSON dictionary that contains some information about the user. You notice that same configuration, the audience parameter here, is in line in the token, saying who this was issued for. And that's the thing you'll have to check to make sure that this isn't a stolen piece of data. Just like a passport in the real life, you have to make sure that someone hasn't taken this and used it where they shouldn't have. There's other information here about when this token was issued, so you can make sure it's still valid and make sure that it hasn't been replayed. There's the user data that we described. And finally, there's some information about who issued this token and how it's been cryptographically signed so that you can check the signature and ensure that it came from Google and hasn't been tampered with. Now, as you can imagine, it starts to get a little bit complicated about knowing all these details. And so what I'll show you next is libraries that you can use to do all of the checks and validation without having to know the internals of these tokens or how they work. So the first thing we need to do is send the token up to the server. The important thing to call out here is to make sure to do this over a secure channel. This is a user's credential that will give them access to their data, so you need to use HTTPS. Once it's on the server, as I described, we'd really strongly recommend using a library to validate this token. It is a standard JSON web token, so you could use any library that allows you to validate such tokens. But we'd recommend that you actually use an identity-specific one that checks the identity-specific claims. We'll have some libraries from Google specifically designed for these Google tokens coming soon on developers.google.com/identity. So once the token's been validated, just like the passport in real life, you can use the information that's available there. And as I described, the key things are checking whether this user has an existing account. So maybe you'll take the email address or the Google user ID, look up that user, and see if there's a matching one. As we've described, you know that in the case of Gmail users, their email address is actually active on this device or browser. They could reset their password if they had a traditional password-based account, and you should let them into that existing account. That's the first step. Now, once you've checked for existing users, the key thing to do is help onboard new users. Now, you know who these users are. You have their identity information, their name, their photo, and their email address, so you can really bootstrap the experience. But depending on the nature of your application, you might need to ask for additional data, so things like their location or their age, or maybe have them agree to terms of service. And that's stuff that you'll have to do in the front end of the app, so you have to spend some response back to finish the account creation process. At the end of the day, the hope is that you can build an experience like this. As Treffyn showed at the beginning, coming to an app, either selecting with one tap or automatically signing into an existing account, with that token behind the scenes replacing manual authentication and a traditional sign-in screen. The takeaway here is that you can really focus on building your service. Adding this front-end pieces of UI have been simplified. You apply the back-end logic that's intended for your application, and you can use libraries that make this a lot easier. Before we move on, I'll add a plug for one more important tool here, and that is Firebase Off. So if you're building for the Firebase platform, you're a new developer, or you're able to migrate in, we have a complete auth system that you can use. So instead of taking these libraries and adding to them to your existing auth system, we can make it a lot easier by using Firebase. OK, so Luke, are there any last questions we could help you with?
Yeah, that seems great that you can outsource all the work to Google by using those libraries. And as a developer, I'm totally convinced. But at the end of the day, we're trying to help out companies. How does this make financial sense to integrate into your site?
That's one that we always have to address, is that as developers, you come to places like Google I/O, and you're probably really convinced that there's opportunities for your auth system. Things could be done better. But we also have to convince people who are decision makers and business stakeholders about identity being worth investing in. So we have great stories from folks like HomeAway here, who have really leveraged the Google Identity platform to better know who their users are, to be able to personalize experiences across devices and get the right content in front of them whenever they come back to their site or app. And on top of that, it really introduces this opportunity that once the users found that right piece of content, they can transact and engage with it. So that's things like smoothing out the checkout flow. I mentioned some of the numbers earlier about the improvement in conversion rates if you can make checkout easier. But we have this interesting stat recently from Pet Loves, just saying, as a big shopping site in South America, that far more of their users are ending up at the checkout page already signed in. They never even needed to see the login page. So you get the best of both, the streamlined experience of a guest checkout, but knowing who that user is and the opportunity to re-engage them as they come back to your service in the future. So things like sending the user emails, if they've opted into that, about upcoming sales, deals, price changes, or maybe a reminder to buy flowers for your mom this weekend. So if you put all these pieces together, you get this smooth, personalized experience where you know your user, you can improve checkout and conversion rates, and you can keep users engaged and secure. After all, in a world where they don't even have passwords, they won't be phished, or you won't have problems with those weak and reused passwords. So I'll leave it to Luke to wrap up today and tell you a little bit about what we covered.
Thank you guys for explaining all this to me. I feel like I learned a lot here. It's a really seamless user experience where you can just skip the sign-in, don't even have to think about it. Transparent data sharing, you know exactly what you're giving away and what you're keeping private. And you get all these security benefits on the side. And for developers, you get all this account quality benefits. So Stephen, where do I go to start?
Well, the place to go we've mentioned a few times today is developers.google.com/identity. That's where you'll find the documentation for all of the APIs that we've described and case studies and examples with many of the partners that we've referenced. And since you're here at I/O, there's a couple of other talks that you'd probably like to visit and check out. We have some coming up tomorrow around building and personalizing an action, leveraging the same ideas and the same underlying Google identity, as well as a deep dive into this experience on the web that I've been talking about today. So if you've got time, definitely check those out tomorrow. And we'd love to continue the conversation. So we monitor the Stack Overflow tag Google-identity. Make sure to leave your questions there. That's the best place to put them out in front of the community. And our contact information is up here on the slides. You can send us an email. I'm sso@google.com. We would love to hear from you. And we'll be in the web sandbox after this or around the stage if you've got questions that you'd like to ask us for. That's tent G over on that side. So thank you very much for your attention today. We would love to hear from you and be able to show your site or your app up here next year at I/O about how you've made identity a more secure and easy experience for your users. Thank you.
Thank you.